Okay, hello and welcome to today's lecture. Uh, we are, today going to discuss some more scheduling algorithms. So, as such, this is the third lecture of the fifth chapter, and the chapter's title is CPU scheduling. Okay, so main idea over here is to discuss various kinds of scheduling algorithms, to analyze them, right, to get a sense of how they work, and then to also see how different operating systems carry out scheduling. So basic idea is simple. The problem that we are solving is very simply put, that in order to support multi-programming, we need to keep multiple processes in memory, or as we need to keep multiple processes memory resident, living in memory. So whenever we need to schedule, so we can schedule due to various events happening. Perhaps a current running process is finishing execution, or perhaps a current running process is off to do I/O, right? Or the current running process has exceeded its time quota. There's an interrupt. So there can be many reasons due to which we need to make a decision as to which process has to be scheduled next, which process has to be given the CPU next. So scheduling answers this very important question, right? And based on the system, based on the application, the requirements can change, and therefore the scheduling algorithm can also change. So in for some scheduling algorithm, it could be most important to maximize utilization. For some other algorithm, it could be to maximize throughput. Third algorithm, maybe fairness is more important. Okay. So based on the requirement, the scheduling algorithm can also change. So in the last lecture, we discussed some basic algorithms for CPU scheduling, and those were first come first serve, and then shortest job first, which was inherently non-preemptive. And so we discussed a preemptive version of shortest job first, called shortest remaining time first, SRTF. Okay. So now we look at some more, and we'll start off by discussing priority scheduling a bit, and then we'll look at round robin scheduling, and then we'll look at some examples. Okay. Okay, so now I am on slide number 2, and we are looking into priority scheduling. Okay, so what do we mean by priority scheduling? So this means that for all the processes that you have in the ready queue, each process is given a tag or a level of importance. Okay, so this importance tag will determine which process will execute first, which process will execute second, and so on. So what this means is, intuitively, given a set of processes, when it's time to make a scheduling decision, which process to be picked among all the processes in the ready queue, well, we pick the process which has the highest priority. Okay, so then what we do is we assign a priority to each and every process in the ready queue, and then when it's time to make a scheduling decision, the process with the highest priority is picked for execution. So we may have a priority for every process, or we may have a priority for a class of processes. So each process that belongs to that class has the same priority. So if you recall, in the first lecture we had discussed how it may help to treat IO bound and CPU bound processes differently. So CPU bound process is one which spends most of its time on the CPU executing instructions. So the input output, the IO, is little or no. So there is little IO or no IO. Whereas an IO bound process spends most of its time doing IO. CPU time is very little, if any. Okay. So what we had discussed was it would be a good idea for the CPU scheduler to treat both IO and CPU bound processes differently. So which means perhaps we can assign a higher priority to IO bound processes. So we divide processes into two buckets, two categories. One bucket has IO bound, other has CPU bound. So we can have some algorithm for determining how you define a process as CPU bound or IO bound depending on percentage, right? So if it's spending at least 50% of its time executing instructions, you call it CPU bound. Anything less is IO, anything more is CPU, right? So you have these two buckets of processes, and when it's time to make a scheduling decision, you pick the IO bound. So we saw how the advantage of that could be that anyway the IO bound processes need the CPU for a small amount of time, so we can quickly get them out of the way, have them use the CPU, and then anyway their IO periods will be more, so they'll be waiting for IO, and then we can give it to the CPU bound, right? So the advantage we get is in a small amount of time many tasks make progress, keep moving in the system from the ready queue to the wait queue to the device queue. On the other hand, if we give more importance to CPU bound, then a large CPU bound may block many IO bound processes. So this is a kind of a simple priority scheme. So likewise, we can assign a priority or an importance tag to each and every process. So when it's time to make a scheduling decision, the process with the highest priority is picked. Okay. So in the previous algorithm, shortest remaining time, was that a priority based algorithm? So was shortest remaining time first a priority based scheduling algorithm? So answer is yes, it was. How are we assigning, or how were we assigning the priorities there? So given a choice, always pick the one which has smallest remaining time, right? So if you have process which needs only one unit to finish, another with 8, another with 10, pick the process with the 1 unit. So shorter the remaining time, higher is the priority. One with the shortest remaining time has the highest priority. So yes, it was an example of a priority based scheduling. Question: why do we need priority based? Well, probably to optimize some metric, right? So if we want to maximize the throughput, the number of jobs or processes that finish execution per unit time, we will probably go for shortest job first, which will ensure shorter jobs finish earlier, and we don't have an scenario in which a long job is blocking many short jobs. So, or if you want to minimize the average wait time, again, which algorithm can be used? Shorter job first. So when we are optimizing, when we want to optimize some metric like average wait time, throughput, we do need some kind of priority. So here what we are saying is a priority number integer is associated with each process. Okay. So if I go over here on my Linux machine and I try to go to a terminal and I press or I hit top table of processes, then for each process you will see a priority value. So on my Linux machine I am seeing some processes have priority value of 20. One is RT, probably means real time. One is minus 51, so I have a negative priority as well. Some are 0. So when we discuss Linux scheduling, then we'll probably see what that means. But you can also try this out. Type in TOP or table of processes and you will see a priority value for each process. So that is the bottom line. For each process we assign a priority value, which tells us how important that process is. So again, interpretation could be maybe smaller number is higher priority or larger number is higher priority. That depends on how we are interpreting it. So a priority number integer is associated with each process. CPU is allocated to process with the highest priority. So perhaps the smallest integer has the highest priority. 0 is highest, then 1, then 2, then 3. Okay. Another example of an algorithm which we will soon discuss, earliest deadline first. This algorithm assigns priority based on the deadline. Earlier deadline implies higher priority. So deadline is the time period by which the process must finish, otherwise the results are useless. So smaller deadline will imply higher priority there. We will discuss it soon. Okay. A problem with priority scheduling is starvation. Low priority processes may never execute. So imagine a dynamic system in which we keep on having processes are arriving. So this can happen at a particular point of time. We may not know that in the future these processes are going to arrive into the system. So what may happen is at current time T1 we have a set of processes. Some of them are low priority ones, some of them are high priority ones, and the high priority ones are executing. And then now as time goes on, we more and more processes are added into the system, and as luck would have it, all of them are high priority ones. So what would happen is the low priority ones, they would be delayed more and more, right? And if there is a continuous stream, in the worst case for an extremely long time, of high priority processes, then they would be really delayed beyond reasonable limits. So one of the side effects of priority scheduling, so nothing comes free. One of the problems or side effects of priority scheduling is starvation, which means low priority processes may never get a chance to execute, or they may get a chance to execute after a long time. So we can do something to take care of that, and that one solution is aging. So aging, which means that depending on how long a process is spending into the system, perhaps in the ready queue, the longer it spends, it ages, which means that we increase or reduce the priority. Well, we increase the priority, because the idea is if a process is in the system for a very long time, it should eventually get a chance to run. So periodically we can increase its priority, and then at a particular point of time, its priority will be such that it gets a chance to run on the CPU. So that is one solution, aging. As time progresses, increase the priority of a process. Eventually it will get a chance to run. So let us look at an example now. Okay, now I am on slide number 3, and here we are doing a practice exercise on process aging. Okay, so a tutorial or a practice exercise on process aging. So what is this aging and why do we go for it? Well, we have discussed that when we are employing priority scheduling, which means that the higher priority processes, they are going to get the CPU earlier as compared to the lower priority processes. So this can cause a side effect, an unintended side effect, when we have a dynamic system. So dynamic system means processes keep on arriving in real time, and the scenario that we have is that all the processes that are arriving into the system, they are all belonging to the higher priority bucket, which means that the lowest or the lower priority processes that we had in the beginning, they will have to wait for an extremely long time to get the CPU. So we don't want that. We want to be fair also, right? So it's sort of a trade-off. When we do priority, we are improving something, right? But we are also, it's also costing us. So here we want to get good performance as well as a certain degree of fairness also. We want to be fair to the low priority processes as well. So what we do with aging is the longer a process spends on the inside the system, inside the ready queue, at periodic intervals we increase its priority. So eventually, after a certain threshold, its priority becomes high enough, and it gets the CPU. Okay. So now let's look at a problem, an interesting one. We have a preemptive priority scheduling algorithm, which means we can, once a process has been picked for execution, if a higher priority process comes in, we have to abort the process currently executing and bring in the higher priority process, right? So something like shortest remaining time first, SRTF. So here the convention is larger number implies higher priority. So if the process numbers or process priority numbers are 0, 1, 2 and 3, which process has the highest priority? Well, the one with 3, lowest one with 0. So a larger priority number implies a higher priority. Now interestingly, because now we are doing aging, the priorities change dynamically over time, and say at a rate of x per second. So every second the priority changes. Okay. Additional constraint given is, if a process is waiting in ready queue, its priority changes at a rate of alpha per second, and if a process is running, its priority changes at a rate of beta. We assume a single CPU, so which means at any given point of time, how many processes are running? One and only one. So all the processes that are waiting in the ready queue, their priority changes at a rate of alpha, and the process that is running on the CPU, its priority changes at a rate beta. All processes, when they enter the ready queue, they are given a priority of 0. So the way it works is, process arrives into the system, it's immediately taken to the ready queue where it waits, and eventually its turn comes, and then it's dispatched to the CPU for execution. So when a process enters the ready queue, its priority is 0. Okay. So now what happens when beta is greater than alpha greater than 0? What happens when alpha is greater than beta is greater than 0? So what we are asking is, which scheduling algorithm do we have in either in both of these scenarios? So I can see what's happening in beta greater than alpha greater than 0. So both alpha and beta, the rate of changes, the rates of change of priority, they are greater than 0, which means they are positive. So we have a value of 1, 2, 4. So what does that say? As time goes on, what's happening to the priorities of processes in general? Are they increasing or are they decreasing? So the rate of change is positive, so which means they are increasing, because the larger number is a higher priority. So let's say if the rate of change is 2 per second, so then after every second, what will be the priority of a process? 0, then 2, then 4, then 6, then 8, then 10 after every second. Right? So eventually its priority number is going up and up, higher and higher. When the rate of change is negative, let's say -2, then what's happening? After every second, 0, -2, -4, -6, -8. So which means that the priority level is reducing. Okay, so that much we can say. And now let's try to analyze this. Okay, so now I am on slide 4, where we discuss the solution. Okay. So given those two rates of change of alpha and beta, we need to figure out the algorithm that will result from that. So first let's look at beta is greater than alpha is greater than 0. So both alpha and beta are positive, which means as time goes on, the priority of each process increases. Now the rate can change. So what we're saying is beta is greater than alpha is greater than 0. So let's plug in some values to get a better sense. So let's say beta is 2, alpha is 1. So beta is the rate of change of priority, of a process which is executing on the CPU. Alpha is the rate of change of priorities of processes inside the ready queue. So let's say beta is 2, alpha is 1. So let's say dynamic system, in beginning nothing is there, then a process comes with the priority level 0. Immediately it's given the CPU as there is no process, and then after 1 second, so that's our time unit, 1 second, after 1 second another process comes in, its priority value is 0, and now what is the priority of the process on the CPU? Beta is 2, so its priority now is enhanced from 0 to 2. Then a third process comes, its priority is 1. The second process, its priority now becomes, the third process comes, its priority is 0. All processes entering have priority of 0. And then the second process, what is its priority? 1, because alpha is 1. And finally now the priority of the first process is 4. And then the fourth process comes, its priority is 0. Priority of the third one is 1. Priority of the second process is 2. Priority of the first process which came in is 6. So beta is 2 and alpha is 1. And now you can get an idea, and it should be easy to see that the process which is on the CPU. So note that the algorithm is preemptive, so we can preempt. But it should be easy to see that the process which is on the CPU, it will always have a higher priority than the processes in the ready queue, simply because its rate of growth is higher. It's 2 versus 1. It could even be more, 3 versus 1, 4 versus 1, right? So which tells us that the process which gets the CPU, it is not going to be preempted. It will finish till it's it will execute till it finishes. And what about the other processes in the ready queue? You can see the one at the head of the queue will always have the highest priority, followed by the second process, followed by the third. So now which algorithm is this? Should be easy to see now. It is FIFO or FCFS, or first come first serve, right? So highest priority will always be with the process on the CPU, and then the earlier a process arrives in the ready queue, the higher its priority will be. The process which is just freshly arrived, it will always have the lowest priority. So which suggests that this is a first come first serve. Okay. Second case, alpha is less than beta is less than 0. Now here what's happening is, as time goes on, the priority of a process reduces. In the previous case, as time went on, the priority of a process increases, which tends to suggest that processes which arrived earlier, their priority will increase the most. So that's a hint that it's first come first serve. Here what's happening is, both alpha and beta are negative, which means as time passes, as time elapses, the priority of a process is actually reducing. Okay, it's actually reducing, which suggests that a process which is newly arrived, it will most likely have the highest priority, right? Because as you move on, the rate of process change of a process priority change is negative. So you go from 0 to -1 to -2 to -3. So as time goes on, your priority is reducing. So here again, let's visualize this. Initially we have one process. So here let's say so alpha is less than beta is less than 0. So let's say alpha is -1, beta is -2, right? So -1 is less than -2 is less than 0, right? -1 is less than -2 is less than 0. Note here that we are talking about rate of change. We are not talking about the values minus 1 and minus 2. As far as the values are concerned, minus 1 is of course greater than minus 2. But here we are talking about the rate of change. Okay. So, which means for a process on the CPU, the rate of change is minus 2, and a process in the ready queue, the rate of change is minus 1. So for the process on the CPU, the values could be 0, minus 2, minus 4, minus 6. The one on the ready queue, a particular process, 0, minus 1, minus 2. Right? So the one on the CPU, its rate is changing faster. So we're talking about the rate of change, not the actual value. Okay. So initially a process comes, its priority is 0, it gets the CPU immediately. Now after 1 second, process 2 comes, its priority is 0, and now the priority of the first process is minus 2, and beta is minus 2. So now among these two, the newly arrived one is a higher priority. Third process comes in, its priority is 0, priority of the second process was minus 1, priority of the first process minus 4. Fourth process arrives, priority of the fourth process is 0, of the third is minus 1, of the second is minus 2, and of the first process is minus 6. So given these values and seeing how they are changing, it now again should be easy to figure out which algorithm we have here. Reverse of above, last in first out. Process that arrives, the fresh process will always have the highest priority. Okay. So I hope this algorithm is clear. First case, it's of FCFS, first come first serve, and second case is the opposite. It is LIFO, or last in first out. Last in first out. So here first one to be executed will be P4, then P3, then P2, then P1. Okay, so I hope it's clear, right? Okay, now we are on slide 5, and now we shift gears to an algorithm which is more fair than the others, with fairness built in. So this is called round robin. So one observation we have had so far is that the priority algorithms tend to be unfair to lower priority processes. So if we want, if fairness is more important to us, then we may need to go for something else. And the answer is round robin, which is a fairer algorithm. So this is similar to first come first serve. So what was first come first serve? Earliest process to arrive is the earliest one to get the CPU. But that was non-preemptive. So that again was not fair, because if the first process to arrive is exceptionally long and the next 10 processes are exceptionally short, then we are in we're in a bit of trouble, because the long process will block the short ones. So the reason for that was because it was non-preemptive. Once we pick the long process to run, it has to run till completion. But the idea is, what if we have first come first serve and add preemption to it? So the idea is that next logical question would be, when will we preempt a process? So the answer for that is, we fix a time quantum, time value, and after that time value we do the preemption. So each process gets a unit of CPU time called a time quantum. After this time has elapsed, the process is preempted and added to the tail of the ready queue. So you can see how this would play out. Let's say we have 4 processes in ready queue, P1, P2, P3, P4, and we assign time quantum as 5 millisecond. So first we give the CPU to which one? P1. It's at the head of the queue. We give the CPU for 5 milliseconds, and if it's not finished by that time, we take out P1, put it at the back. So now our queue reads from head to tail P2, P3, P4, P1. Then we give it to P2, put it at the back, then P3, then P4. So this is a round robin. So what's happening is, it's first come first serve, but now with preemption, and every process is getting the CPU after a specific amount of time. So we have, no starvation. Fairness is inherent in this algorithm, and we will have, no starvation here, right? So if you have 4 processes and time is 5 milliseconds, then in the worst case, process 4 will get the CPU after how much time? So 0 to 5 for P1, 5 to 10 for P2, 10 to 15 for P3, and 15 to 20 for P4. So after every 15 milliseconds, P4 is guaranteed the CPU. Okay. So of course, what happens if a process finishes before the expiry of its time quantum? So let's say it's only 2 milliseconds are left and your time quantum is 5 milliseconds. Well then, anyway, you can give the CPU to the next process in the queue, in the ready queue. So theoretically, if there are n processes in the ready queue and the time quantum is q, then each process gets 1 by n of the CPU time in slots of at most q time units at once. So if n is 4 and q is 5, right? N is 4 and q is 5. Each process gets 1 by n of CPU time, 1/4. So it's divided. The CPU time, if you have 4 processes, it's divided equally among those 4 processes. Each process gets 1/4 of the available CPU time that you have. Okay. So if 1 is the available CPU time for all processes, each one will get 1/4. So you can see how it's fair. But the catch is that at one time it gets the CPU, a process gets the CPU at most q time units. Okay. So you chop up the CPU equally among all processes, and the fairness is there because each process at any one time, it cannot go over the time quantum. Okay. So let's look at an example. Okay, so now I am on slide number 6. So example of round robin with time quantum 4. So this is the same set of processes, same bag of processes that we use for first come first serve and shortest job first. So 3 processes, P1, P2, P3, burst times, execution costs 24, 3 and 3. Okay. So this is how we are running it. First we give the CPU to P1, 0 to 4, right? Time quantum is 4, so at time t equal to 4, we take away the CPU from P1. Now we give it to P2. We can give the CPU to P2 for how many time units? 4 milliseconds, 4 seconds, we can call it whatever. But what is the execution cost of P2? 3. So which means, will P2 keep the CPU for 4 units? No. At 7 we need to give the CPU to the next process in the queue, which is 3. So every time a process uses up its quantum and is not finished, goes back to the tail of the ready queue. If it's finished, of course, it exits. So then at 7, P3 takes the CPU, finishes at 10, and at time equal to 10, both P2 and P3 are done, and now we give the CPU to P1. So note that after every 4 units, we are checking whether there is any other process into the system. Although this one has 3, but the way round robin is programmed, after the expiry of the time unit, it checks the ready queue whether there is any other process. So it will check at 14, 18, 22, 26, 30. So total time is still the same. But here you can see what happens is processes P2 and P3, they finish execution quite early in the schedule. If you look at first come first serve, process P2 got the CPU at what time? 24. Process P3 got the CPU at what time? 27. average wait times. So wait times for P2 and P3 were quite large in first come first serve, and therefore the average wait time also shot up. In this case, P2 and P3 don't have to wait for long. Wait time for P2 is 4, wait time for P3 is 7. So it is more than it is for shortest job first. Shortest job first, the wait times for P2 and P3 were, depending on which one of them goes first, 0 for P2, 3 for P3, or 0 for P3, 3 for P2. So this one is a bit higher, but still, they get the CPU fairly quickly. So this one is more fair. We are giving it to the CPU to P2 and P3 fairly quickly, but P1 is also making progress. So this is, probably the most fair algorithm of all. Round robin. Okay. So P1, then P2, then P3, and then P1 all the way till completion. So all processes get the CPU, after relatively small amount of time. Right. So round robin. Okay. So now I am on slide number 7. Round robin wait time analysis. So with this technique, what is the maximum wait time for a process? So intuitively, what can we say about the wait times of processes in round robin? Well, because of its inherent nature, we can say wait times will not be too large, because we are rotating the CPU execution among many processes. So eventually the turn will come. So if there are 5 processes and Q is 5, in the worst case, how much time does a process have to wait? Right. So process 1 0 to 5, process 2 5 to 10, process 3 10 to 15, process 4 15 to 20, and process 5 20 to 25. So maximum wait time for a process is 20. Minimum is 0, of course. So we can generalize for the general case of n processes and Q value for time quantum, maximum wait time is n minus 1 into Q. So maximum time by which after the elapsing of that time, process will start running. N minus 1 into Q. N over here is 5, Q is 5. 5 minus 1 into Q, 4, 4 into 5, 20. Okay. So maximum wait time is not bad at all. It's quite good. In contrast, the waiting time could be high in FCFS or priority based scheduling. So if we have FCFS, of course waiting time could be much higher. We saw the previous example, 24 3 and 3 processes. In FCFS, the waiting time for the third process was 27. Right, 27. Here it's quite less. Waiting time in even priority based scheduling could be high. If you have a constant stream of high priority processes coming in, and if you don't have aging, then your low priority processes waiting time could be quite high. Okay. So the goal of round robin is to share the CPU equally among all processes and to reduce the overall waiting time. Okay. Share the CPU equally among all processes, so it's divided, right? If you have 5 processes, CPU is divided, and those are the only 5 that have to run. So the CPU is divided equally among all of them. Of course, it's possible that a process finishes earlier than the expiry of the time quantum. That's all. That's very much possible. Yeah. So share the CPU equally among all processes, and of course to reduce the overall waiting time. So because of the round robin nature, the turn comes quite quickly. Okay. Of course, how quickly it comes will depend on how many processes you have. If in this example, instead of 5, we had 50 processes, wait time would increase, but eventually it will come. Or if we have large time quantums, so you have to adjust the time quantum properly. It should not be too high. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide number 8. So a bit more of analysis of round robin is what we're doing now. So by the way, round robin is the preferred algorithm of choice in the machines we use in our daily life. So in our desktop or laptop, because as such these are all general regular processes, and We want to be fair among all of them. So generally round robin is preferred. So each process makes good progress, right? And also because of the time quantum is small, like 5 milliseconds, so the switching among processes is very fast. So if a process is getting CPU after 20-25 milliseconds, as human users we won't even notice that time, right? So to us it will appear as that is the only process, right? That abstraction will be there. So first statement we have here is no process is allocated the CPU for more than one time quantum at a stretch. So that's the maximum you can get in order to maintain the fairness. In the vanilla version of the algorithm, no process is allocated the CPU for more than one time quantum. Okay. So there is one exception to the rule. What is that? Can we have a scenario in which we are allocating the CPU to a process for more than one time quantum? We saw this in our example. Well, if it's the only process remaining. So P1 was a long process. Once P2 and P3 were finished, I think at time 10, P2 and P3 were finished and P1 was the only one remaining. So then if you want, you can allocate, because that's the only one remaining, you can allocate for more than one time quantum. So performance of round robin depends on the size of the time quantum, definitely. Let's look at two sort of ends of the spectrum. What happens if Q is very large? So in our previous case, let's say execution costs were 24, 3 and 3. What happens if the time quantum is 30? Right? So then this round robin degenerates to first come first serve. If Q is 30, then P1 till completion, then P2 till completion, then P3 till completion. So round robin degenerates to first come first serve. If the time quantum is not that large, let's say instead of 4 it's 10, right? So which means each process is getting the CPU for longer. So which means process P2 and P3 might have to wait a bit longer, right? Process P2 will get the CPU at time t equal to 10. Process 3 will get the CPU at time t equal to 20. Okay. What happens if Q is very small? Let's say if Q is 1. Then you have a very fast switching among processes. 0 to 1 P1, 1 to 2 P2, 2 to 3 P3, 3 to 4 P1 and so on. So this may also not be a good idea. Why? If Q is very small, what is the issue with that? Waiting time wise we'll do well. In fact, each process has to wait for a smaller amount of time. P2 is getting the CPU at t equal to 1, P3 is getting it at t equal to 2. But what is the other problem? What is the problem here? Problem is extremely large number of context switches, and as we know, context switches are pure overhead. So if we have too many of those, our performance will degrade. It takes time to process the context switch, to do the state save and reload from the PCB process control block. So that is also not good. So ideally we want Q to be large with respect to the context switch time, right? So if Q is equal to the context switch time, then we have a lot of context switches. Q is very small. Q has to be large enough, but not too large, because if it's too large, then it becomes first come first serve. So we need sort of a middle path. So something like 5 milliseconds is not a bad value. So typical context switch times are in the microsecond range, microseconds. So context switch time will also depend on your hardware speed, time to load, reload, save. If you have parallel registers, so you can save and reload the context of multiple processes in parallel, then of course you will do better in terms of context switch times. Average context switch time processing, right? And time quantum is generally in the milliseconds range. So what if time quantum was also in the microsecond range? So value of time quantum is 1 microsecond. Time of context switch is also 1 microsecond. So that's a really bad scenario to have, because for every 1 microsecond that you do some useful work, you have a context switch. So bad scenario to have. So we want Q to be large with respect to context switch time. So if time quantum is in the millisecond range, and if context switch time is the microsecond range, we will be in good shape. So let's say after every 5 millisecond, we have a context switch overhead of 4 or 5 microseconds. Not too bad at all, right? Yes, now I am on slide 9, and this is just showing in the form of a picture the effect of context switch time on the performance. Process time is 10, and then we have 3 scenarios. What we are doing is changing the value of quantum from one scenario to the other. Scenario 1, value of quantum is 12, quite large. So what will happen when value of quantum is 12, larger than the processing time? Degenerate, round robin will degenerate to first come first serve. No context switches, but it's first come first serve. If time quantum is 6, then we have one context switch. If time quantum is 1, bad scenario, 9 context switches at t is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Right? 9 is when we have the last context switch. 10 at 10 we're finished. Nothing more. No more computation to do. Okay. And of course, generally, this is a simplistic drawing. Generally, we have many processes. This is only one process. Generally, we have many processes. So, bottom line, what we learn from here is time quantum should not be too large, right? As it performance degenerates to first come first serve. Time quantum should not be too small, because then the context switch times dominate and your utilization goes down, a lot of overhead. So they should be somewhere in between. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now I am on slide 10, another tutorial or exercise for us. A system has, so this is on round robin scheduling. A system runs 10 IO bound tasks and 1 CPU bound task. So task is nothing but a process. Okay. 10 IO bound processes, 1 CPU bound process. IO bound tasks issue an IO operation once after every millisecond of CPU computing. So by definition, IO bound tasks or IO bound processes, their CPU activity is for a short duration. So they will do 1 millisecond of CPU computing, after which they will issue an IO op or IO operation. Each IO op takes 10 milliseconds to complete. Okay. So 1 millisecond, then 10 millisecond IO, then 1 millisecond CPU, then 10 millisecond IO. Context switch overhead is 0.1 milliseconds. Okay. So context switch overhead is 0.1 millisecond. Okay, so 1 millisecond is 1000 microseconds. So 0.1 millisecond is 100 microseconds. Not bad. Seems reasonable. Right? All processes are long running. So just to keep things simple, we can assume all processes are long running. In fact, we can even assume that they are infinite processes. So we don't need to worry about the finish time. So what is the CPU utilization for a round robin scheduler when the time quantum is 1 millisecond versus when the time quantum is 10 milliseconds? Okay. So we are running the round robin scheduler on this bag of tasks, the 10 IO and 1 CPU, and in the first scenario our time quantum is 1 millisecond, so it is a bit on the less side. Still it is quite significantly larger than the context switch overhead, which is 0.1. Context switch overhead is 10% of the time quantum. It's small. Okay. And in the second scenario, time quantum is 10 milliseconds. So quite quite large. So let us try to generate the schedule for round robin, and then we can see the utilization. How do we calculate the utilization? We take a particular point of the whole CPU time, and then we see what percentage of that time was spent on doing useful work. Useful work here is executing CPU instructions, having CPU activity, something which is not a context switch. Okay. So that will give us a utilization. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 11, and now we will discuss the solution to the previous problem. So once again, as a recap, we are given 11 processes, 10 of them are IO bound, right? So because they are IO bound, the IO activity will overshadow the CPU activity, and the way both of these activities happen is 1 millisecond of CPU activity followed by 10 milliseconds of IO activity. Okay, 1 millisecond CPU, 10 millisecond IO. Okay. So if you're looking at a process that starts at 0 and then does 1 millisecond of activity, and then 10 milliseconds of IO. So if there is no other process, if there is no multi-programming, 0 to 1 CPU, 1 to 11 wait, and then 11 to 12 again CPU, 12 to 22 again wait, 22 to 23 CPU. So this is if there is one profile or one job, one process. If you have many, we can do multi-programming, no problem. Okay, so now what is the CPU utilization for a round robin scheduler when the time quantum is 1 millisecond. So let's look at that case. So time quantum is 1 millisecond means no matter how much you have to run, no matter what your execution cost is, no matter what your execution cost is, you can't run for more than 1 millisecond, which means after 1 millisecond the CPU shall be taken away from you. Okay, CPU shall be taken away from you. So whether you are IO bound or CPU bound. So IO bound anyway, it is doing CPU activity only for 1 millisecond. CPU bound, although for CPU bound what it does is, it is just a long running one. Okay. So let me just check. Yeah, so for CPU bound we are not given the execution time. So let's assume it's an infinitely running one, right? So which means if you don't have round robin, it will keep on running forever. So here, but the quantum is 1 millisecond. So anytime, so when the CPU bound is available, it runs for 1 millisecond, and then again you interrupt. So which tells us that no matter whether we are running a CPU or an IO bound, we have 1 millisecond of IO activity, and then 0.1 of context switch. So it shows in this chart. First, let's say the IO bound tasks are run. So 0 to 1 first task, and then 1 to 1.1 context switch, 1.1 to 2.1 second IO process, then 2.1 to 2.2 context switch, 2.2 to 3.2 third IO bound process, 3.2 to 3.3 context switch. So we'll there are 10 of these, 10 IO bound. So the 10th one will start execution at 9.9 and then finish at 10.9, and then the context switch will be 11. So time 11 all IO bound will be done, and utilization is still the same, 1 millisecond of CPU work followed by 0.1 of context switch. And now for the CPU, although it's infinitely running, but context switch time is only 1. So now by 12.1 we can see that the first process is ready with its IO done, so it can be given. So the way we're cycling through is 10 IO, then 1 CPU, then IO, then CPU. So no matter how you look at it, whether you have an IO bound or whether you have a CPU bound, they run for 1 millisecond and then context switch of 0.1 milliseconds. So utilization is 1 divided by 1.1, sorry. So 1 by 1.1 is 90.9, roughly 91%. Okay. So that is the first one. Second scenario, the value of Q is 10 milliseconds. So will it have any effect on this IO bound? It will not, because as such they are IO bound. So one process cannot use more than 1 millisecond anyway, no matter what the context switch time is. But what about the CPU bound? For CPU bound it will help, because it can, once it gets the CPU, it can run uninterrupted for 10 milliseconds. So in general, intuitively what we feel is overall utilization will go up, because the CPU CPU bound, once it gets the processor, it will run uninterrupted for 10 milliseconds without any context switch. Whereas in the earlier case, even the CPU bound process was running for only 1 millisecond before a context switch. So again, showing in the chart, first the IO bound run, at 11 they are done, and then the CPU bound comes 11 to 21, 10 milliseconds, and then 21 to 21.1. So this is one cycle. So now when we see for the IO bound, they take up 11 milliseconds including the context switch time, out of which this CPU time is only 10 and 1 is your context switch time. So there are 10 IO bound, 0.1 millisecond for each IO bound. So for 10 IO bound, 10 into 0.1, 1 millisecond. So 10 by 11 is the utilization for IO. For CPU it's 10 divided by 10.1. Okay. So total time to cycle through all 11 processes, 11 plus 10.1, 21.1. And total time taken for CPU execution, 10 plus 10, 20. So 20 by 21.1, 94.7. So as expected, the utilization for second case is more, because although for the IO bound it's the same story, 1 divided by 1.1, but the CPU bound now takes advantage, since the CPU bound is assumed to be almost infinitely running. So CPU bound, when it gets the processor, it runs uninterrupted for 10 milliseconds. So because of that, for CPU bound the utilization is a lot more. So 10 by 10.1 is about 99. And so then if you add for all of them along with the 10 IO execution plus 1 CPU bound execution, you get 20 by 21.1, 94.7. Okay. So in first case, when Q is 1, utilization is 91%. Okay. Still quite good. That's because we normally always have a process ready. Right. Once we cycle through all 10 IO, so we're doing multi-programming. When at 1.1, now we bring the other process in. So once all 10 IO bound have executed, we give to the CPU, and then once the CPU is done, now the first IO bound is ready, and then a cascading effect, second IO bound is ready, third IO bound is ready, and so on and so forth. So we'll always have a process to execute. So 91%. If we increase the quantum, it really helps the CPU bound to get more work done, increase the utilization, and overall utilization also increases to 94.7. So I hope this exercise is clear. Okay.